This week on the Crisis Conflict Emergency Management Podcast.
The information war is very much alive and not just at the grassroots level. We almost see playing out in Ukraine, methods that are kind of being tested for the first time, too. I mean, Zelensky would be the obvious great example with that. But even testing, how the public is responding to disinformation, to countering that disinformation, and, what effect it has on both public sentiment and the, drive of individuals with power to be able to make decisions in this space.
Welcome to the Crisis, Conflict, and Emergency Management Podcast, where we have global conversations and share perspectives about international crisis, preparedness, and how to build more resilient societies. My name is Kyle, and I'll be your host. And just how vulnerable are we to the changing international environment, and what can we learn from this experience? From AI to space warfare to community development and crisis communications, there's something here for everyone. Join us for unique international conversations and perspectives into the current threats, challenges, and risks to our society. This podcast is brought to you by Capacity Building International and sponsored by the International Emergency Management Society. Okay, so today we're joined by Bridget Johnson, who is a veteran journalist, newsroom leader, and terrorism analyst with a specialty in online open source extremist propaganda, recruitment, and training. She has diverse experience in radio, TV, and live speaking engagements, host and presenter of Homeland Security Today, law enforcement training webinars, studying a wide range of counterterrorism topics, including conspiracy theory, extremism, complex coordinated attacks, and critical infrastructure, amongst many other topics, to include also WMD threats. Bridget, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today. It's very nice to have you here.
Thank you for having me. Look forward to it.
So one of the reasons that I wanted to have you on the podcast was because you had a post on LinkedIn, which I thought was incredibly interesting, about crowdsourcing conflict. And with the background of the current conflict in Ukraine and sort of your work and your specialty, how did you come to this point of where you've identified this what I think is a very unique term about crowdsourcing conflict and what we're seeing in Ukraine these days? So where did you sort of start, and then how did you end up in this place where you've identified and watched these things?
So my coverage of anonymous and basically non-state actors jumping into conflict began back in the kind of heyday of ISIS, when they had the physical caliphate in Iraq and Syria. And you remember at that time that the terror group was capitalizing on social media like no terror group had done before. They were taking advantage of everything from Twitter to Facebook to WhatsApp to YouTube to, every file sharing site, JustPace, archive.org, to be able to disseminate their propaganda, to be able to recruit new followers, to be able to have an open line of communication. And, what we saw as a result was, a huge stream of foreign fighters from all around the world and people who were recruited on their home turf. And there was a big emphasis on, I called it at the time the bloom where you're planted terror recruitment, where, just stay at home and do your thing there. So Anonymous at the time, the collective, there is no group per se, there's no group leader, there's no group website, there's no group meetings, anything like that. So this loose collective of hackers jumped into the game with Op ISIS. And so what they were doing was, because, there was so much social media out there for law enforcement to try to catch, there was so much for social media companies to spot and take down. Anonymous was filling the void, basically, and jumping in, taking down social media accounts, taking down their websites, and so, waging cyber war from that front. Now, as soon as Russia invaded Ukraine, Anonymous came out with Op Russia. But this one has taken on a little bit of a different dimension, because you still have Anonymous going and taking down websites, swiping information, doing data dumps from Russian entities. But they recognized in this case that there was an information warfare aspect to it. They wanted to be able to have a way to fight Russia's disinformation and also combat the fact that Putin blocked traditional sources of media and social media within Russia so that people would not be able to get the accurate news about what was happening in Ukraine. So some anonymous programmers came up with this tool, web-based tool, where people could go and send text messages to random Russian cell phone numbers. And then they expanded that to be able to personally call them, to be able to send WhatsApp messages, and just multiple routes where people could send a message. And they were, encouraging people to don't be hostile about it, be friendly, but be straightforward and, maybe send pictures, videos, just demonstrate, what is happening in Ukraine. And the latest stats that I saw on it was that over 50 million messages have been sent using that one tool. And how they did that was not with fellow hackers. They put the tool out there, they advertised it to people on social media who were concerned about Ukraine, people who did not have any hacking skills, but people who wanted to be part of this information warfare. And one of the comments I remember seeing on one of those LinkedIn posts was somebody saying, oh, this is great. This is all about the younger generation who's savvy with technology, getting into the game. And no. You actually looked at the people who were responding to Anonymous and saying, hey, I sent 100 messages the other day, or, I did this on my phone the other day. And a lot of them, the majority, I would say, were like retirees, stay-at-home moms. One woman was boasting that she had been able to send 50 text messages to Russians while she was breastfeeding. So there was a component that we've never really seen before there, where people were so eager to get into the fight. And they were reporting back that, some of the Russians were answering them. Some were not nice, but some were very nice. And, were engaging in conversations. Some were relating to these digital warriors, as we'd call them, saying, hey, I hadn't heard that news. Hey, where can I find some news? How can I get through, on my internet? So they were able to relay instructions from Anonymous on how to use the Tor browser, how to get around the different blocks of censors in Russia. And I think that the greatest takeaway from that, and this is something that everybody from governments to nonprofits to, anybody with a stake in the security game whatsoever, is that people don't just want to be on the defensive. People want to be on the offense. And so in this case, providing them with a route to be able to say, hey, I am actively participating in countering the disinformation from Russia, reaching out to Russians personally, and being part of this greater, gray hat operation from Anonymous is very, very priceless to a lot of these people. And so that, I think, is definitely a takeaway that can be channeled into so many areas.
Yeah, I've read in multiple accounts of where I've actually seen the tool that you were talking about, because I've seen that just sort of spread across social media and many different sort of Telegram groups and things like that. And it's extremely interesting from the perspective of they've been able to leverage a portion of society to enact on their behalf. But certainly Anonymous is not the only actor in town as well. And so I think what we're seeing in terms of the Ukraine conflict is also a significant leveraging of social media and things like that. And Zelensky's playing a very good role in this as well. So what else are you seeing across the spectrum of, if you want to call that, information operations or whatever, and in terms of the Ukraine conflict? Because it is certainly, and I think most people largely recognize, this is an entirely new era in terms of trying to deal with these issues, an open conflict in Europe, and then the impact in the terms of use of social media and many other tools that you've mentioned.
Yeah, you can't help but look at it and think, and watch it unfold and think, how would the Second World War have turned out if these information channels were open back then and truth was able to be spread in the areas where it needed to be? You notice that with Zelensky, his perception, his persona, the amount of people rallying vociferously to his side changed so much just with that first video. It was like a selfie video with he and the members of his cabinet, with the government buildings in the backdrop, and just proving that they were still there, that they weren't fleeing, that they weren't going anywhere. And that's when he took off as a household name, that's for sure. But also rallied this invaluable grassroots support that has basically held a lot of governments to account. A lot of policymakers and are not going to want to say no at this point to the things that Ukraine needs and the help that they want because of the public groundswell. But of course, in this space too, we have the disinformation ops. Now, from what I've heard, the usual staffing of Russian troll farms may be down at this point because what's happening to the ruble, these are still people who are on salary and need to be paid. But it's very easy to go into, for example, a Twitter conversation and pick out the trolls who are responding. They follow a lot of people, have a couple of followers themselves, and are spouting lines that, if you copy and paste that line and put it into search, you'll find multiple accounts basically spouting the exact same, rebuttal or argument or retort. And I think that for people who have been paying attention in this conflict, especially for the people who have decided to join those information ops in some way, they're getting more educated about what the disinformation looks like and how to be able to spot it. But unfortunately, we've also seen disinformation parroted by some mainstream sources here in the United States. And we even have seen that reflected on Russian state TV, where hosts have brought up different pieces of media coverage in the United States that they thought were favorable to them and basically giving them a good boy pat on the back. The information war is very much alive and not just at the grassroots level. We almost see playing out in Ukraine, methods that are kind of being tested for the first time, too. I mean, Zelensky would be the obvious great example with that. But even testing, how the public is responding to disinformation, to countering that disinformation, and, what effect it has on both public sentiment and the, drive of individuals with power to be able to make decisions in this space.
While you were, explaining that a bit more, where I kind of was starting to think was in terms of the whole portion of crowdsourcing and information and disinformation. So not all crowdsourcing is necessarily negative, right? And so I've also seen in many different sort of groups and coordination groups for Ukraine and trying to respond from a humanitarian aspect, lots of sort of crowdsourcing going on in Poland, Moldova, Romania, and things like that, where people are trying to help. And in many cases, they haven't had to put up, say, a lot of refugee centers in Poland because so many people have taken them in to private homes due to crowdsourcing. So there's multiple dimensions here, and I think some are obviously very positive, and then some of have a very negative net effect. But I think one of the things that is really quite different this time that we're seeing in the Ukrainian conflict, and you'd mentioned, say, what would happen if this was happening in history. But one of the things is really interesting in terms of the disinformation pieces is seeing really just all the different types of videos coming out, and even like I'm in Germany, so I watch the German news, and then I see sort of video coming out that has already been disproven, that is not from the Ukraine conflict, but is shown on sort of the morning news, in Germany. And just the amount of sheer sort of disinformation and that is just out there is so difficult to weed through to be able to get a really accurate understanding of what's happening on the ground itself. Like from your perspective, how much of a challenge is this? Is this a proportionally significant challenge? I mean, what are we sort of looking at here?
Yeah, I mean, the minute that you mentioned that, the first thing I thought of was how the first deepfake video has been deployed. It was that deepfake video of Zelensky saying that he was going to surrender. And to the trained eye, it wasn't a very good deepfake. To the untrained eye, it might have been real. The video sphere has been very difficult because when we even look at past conflicts, we've seen that still photos, for example, were altered to reflect a certain viewpoint, so to speak. And videos can be hard to put back in the bottle because once a video comes out that shows something shocking, that shows something that supports a certain viewpoint, it can spread like wildfire across social media. And even when the fact checkers follow up on that and say, no, this is not a real video, here are the points where, it was obviously doctored, the cat's already out of the bag. And there are some people who, as we've seen too on social media circles, are not going to accept the ruling of the fact checker. And this is also coming at a point when conspiracy theory extremism has taken off like never before. You can have a video out there that is correct, and you could have a mass of people from QAnon or some other ideological movement trying to make some vociferous argument about why it was doctored, why it's some sort of government or media conspiracy, and, this is what the real story is. And so going into a conflict with that environment already on the ground is definitely a challenge. But I just have to add to what you said before about humanitarian relief. That has definitely been the upside of all of this. Just seeing that groundswell, seeing groups like World Central Kitchen be able to report in real time what is going on the ground, who is getting fed, who needs relief. Being able to see the people who are coming across the border and to see their needs in real time, and for people to just take it upon themselves to organize humanitarian, in this case, basically disaster relief, has just been extraordinary. So we definitely have two sides of this coin in this conflict.
Oh, definitely. What are your thoughts when you see some of these videos coming out that are posted almost daily now, right? Where, the SBU in Ukraine has intercepted a phone call with some people, the soldier in Ukraine and is calling his mother, in Russia. And there's a couple of questions about this. First of all, I mean, like, I don't even know if it's authentic, right? That's always the first question. The second thing is, and we've seen sort of people reporting from Moscow, from Russia, and just the level of, cognitive dissonance there that's occurring in terms of propaganda is sometimes amazing. What are your kind of thoughts when you see these things coming up in the social media sphere? Because for me, it's also a tool. It's a tool that people are using to portray a certain image as well every time they release these recorded conversations.
Yeah, it's definitely something that can be of value of transparency if, like you said, it's real. One of the things that Anonymous has been doing has been intercepting military radio bands and posting a lot of the conversations that go along there, especially if they have something to do with military movements or resupply or anything that they think, might be able to help the Ukrainian side. Another thing, the quick aside that they've been doing is that they've been penetration testing all of the cameras around Kyiv to ensure that Russia cannot hack them to be able to see movements of Zelensky or military or police or anybody else in the city. And so after penetration testing, I think they found that like 3% were vulnerable, and they reported those to the authorities in Kyiv so that they could take care of that. But the interception of communications, though, makes you think about how that can be done in other scenarios as well, too. Take, for example, if there's a major hurricane that happened and it turns into, some sort of relief fiasco like we've seen with some past events. And hackers could intercept emergency band communications and post them to say that things like, well, they were really telling you that you should have gone to this spot, or that, they didn't have enough capacity for people and they knew it beforehand, etc. So there's a lot of implications for being able to intercept private communications that are going on, with government entities or nonprofits, etc., that are reaching beyond this conflict. But I think we're definitely getting a taste of that here, and like we've stressed, it's not easy to be able to tell which are authentic, though I think there's definitely also been a language barrier with some of the people who have been intercepting some of these communications. So they throw them out there in a lot of cases just to be able to say, who can interpret this? What are they saying? They're doing that with data dumps as well. Hey, we're just going to throw it out there. It's all public. Everybody just dip into it, see what you can interpret, and let us know.
Yeah, definitely. I wanted to talk about that really quick, and then I'd like to sort of turn this back to the U.S. in a way of, now that we're watching this, what does it mean for us type of point. But in terms of these data dumps and in terms of the sanctions, I think that, when we talk about crowdsourcing conflict and the term that you're using, which again I think is very fitting, we're seeing sanctions being applied by nation state to another nation state, different mechanisms being used. But then you're seeing also these, I don't even know the word that I would call it, but these sort of implied sanctions, or the social sourcing of sanctions, from companies that continue to operate in Russia and things like that. And so we're seeing this in expanded effort as well. And you mentioned the data dumps, and so that's sort of astonishing to watch in terms of people just basically taking action on their own outside of the normal mechanisms that you typically have, which is generally a civilian tools, diplomacy, economic, and even military tools that go along with an international response to a crisis. So what does this mean in terms of all these various non-state actors getting involved, as you mentioned, from mothers in, I don't know, Oklahoma, right, who are sending text messages to
Right.
Non-affiliated groups like Anonymous?
Well, once you have that kind of power in your hands, I mean, it can be used for good or bad. One that's kind of more innocuous that I really liked was they were able to hack point of sale terminals in Russia, so that when people got their receipt at a restaurant, it was saying Putin kills children, Putin kills children. And they've also been able to hack ATMs so that when people select Russian as the language, the message Slava Ukraini comes up. But on the other hand, there's one anonymous affiliated hacking group that's been doing some pretty major work, named MB65, stands for Network Battalion. they announced the other day that they had hacked a Russian entity, and they're like, "Hey, does the ransomware we used look familiar?" And it turns out that they used ransomware that was from the Conti ransomware group, which is Russia-based, pro-Russia. Earlier in the conflict, Anonymous had hacked into some internal chats from the Conti group and had released them. And that seemed to spark some worry at DHS because the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency quickly put out a message after that saying that, hey, Conti is still very much a threat. They're still trying to attack U.S. entities as we speak. So, don't think that, they've let up or anything like that. But so this hacker MB65, he takes the Conti ransomware, he modifies it in a way that it's unable for them to use Conti's antidote, we should say, and deploys it on this Russian entity. And on the face of it, you're just like, oh man, that's kind of cool. They took this Russian ransomware and they turned it around on Russia. But then you realize, oh, okay, so this more impervious, impenetrable type ransomware is out there now. So, they're not using it for the point of trying to extract ransom. They're just using it for wholesale damage. So the innovation that we see come out of necessity in this cyber war and information warfare can have the potential for bad or good. Depends whose hands it's in, depends if they're a gray hat or a white hat or a black hat. If there is something that another government does that they don't like, can they take those skills? Can they even take some of that non-hacker digital army and turn it around on that government?
Yeah, and I think that's really the key point here. While it's been amazing to watch sort of all these different examples come up, like you were mentioning, and how they've hacked television stations and everything else that go along with it. I think that the larger question remains of what happens when it's us, right? So what happens if
Right.
those same organizations or that same effort is applied in the United States? And we typically, at least on this podcast, we talk about the sort of the emergency management piece and sort of the international crisis piece and how those sort of fit together. But I can't imagine, and you already gave sort of a different example, but if you have a large scale disaster, say there's another Hurricane Katrina or there's, anything coming up like that, and you have intercepted conversations, or you have, somebody's just not happy and they, sort of start turning the same tools in the United States, what sort of outcomes would happen? And I think that's, that's unsettling in terms of trying to understand the impact that would happen. And it would really sort of knock us back in terms of the response mechanisms, just because you'd have to be contending with all this other additional information pieces coming up, having to also be very reactive to everything coming up, trying to get ahead of all these things, and you simply don't have any control over it.
Exactly, because, is that sort of tool going to, help, for example, search and rescue efforts by, letting you know which people are on the rooftops, which people need rescue? Or is it going to hamper the efforts by disrupting communications, by throwing a wrench in the operations? Even if someone is jumping into communications or operations, from a non-state perspective, with good intentions, it could also end up disrupting the entire process in a way that the outside actor could not have foreseen because they're not familiar with inside operations. I think that's a real danger.
Yeah, definitely. And what is your perception in terms of our communities being prepared to contend with these types of new issues that we're seeing evolve, like in the situation in Ukraine? I mean, there's been, and the reason why I say that is because there's always been, maybe not always is the best word, but there's always been, at least for a number of years, sort of this ongoing discussion about information and disinformation, and it's been going on for quite a few years now. But, we're seeing results of Ukraine, and we're seeing the fact that, it's just suddenly, at least in my opinion, right, my uninformed opinion, that it's just,
Hmm.
basically just exploded in terms of the amount and quantity and capabilities. It's almost as if it's a proving ground, it's a testing ground, and that people are going to learn from this and adapt and get even better. And I'm just now wondering how effective we've been in terms of being able to manage the situation in the States, and then being able to look at what's happening in Ukraine and then better prepare our communities for something that might happen internally.
Yeah, I really don't think that we've been ahead of it. And one thing that was unfolding for quite a while before Ukraine happened in terms of crowdsourcing information, and this is, on the domestic front, very, very concerning, is the crowdsourcing of extremist information. And if you think about it, all of these terror tutorials, the Inspire magazine, different guides that have been put out by Al Qaeda, by ISIS, by, Al Shabaab, different associated groups that were in English, that were geared towards a Western audience, are on the internet still for anybody to find. I did a little experiment the other day to go through one file sharing site and see how many issues of Inspire I was able to find, and I was able to find almost all of them. And these include the recipes, for example, the pressure cooker bomb that was used at the Boston Marathon. These include step by step, very detailed pictorials on how to build IEDs, different devices, target selection, getting into hard targets, getting into soft targets, etc. And so these materials are out there for any extremist of any stripe to be able to access, to be able to use. But after the January 6th events, we actually saw this more overt sort of joining, you could say, where Al Qaeda, they released a video and they referenced January 6th, and they showed some of the scenes from the Capitol attack and said that, hey, if there is any help you guys need, you can find it in the magazines that we put out from the Arabian Peninsula. And that's the Inspire magazines with the bomb recipes. And that was kind of extraordinary to see that public voicing of kind of like what we knew was going on, with being able to information share and cross pollinate and have this big pool of extremist how to information out there. And I really think that is, one of the great things that security is going to have to contend with in the coming era. Is just, you have people who are crowdsourcing information, like I said, for good. You have, people who are crowdsourcing information for very, very bad. And now with different tried, tested, and true methods coming out of the Ukraine conflict, how are those going to be able to be used for recruiting new members, for being able to disrupt law enforcement communications and intercept law enforcement communications, to be able to, for example, if there's another event like the music festival that was attacked in Las Vegas, could people be finding out about security measures from the venue managers beforehand? Could they be looking for vulnerabilities and access points? Could they be able to disrupt the ability of first responders to get there and to organize, and to be able to effectively respond to an emergency like that? So we're definitely going into some dark new territory.
So then, if we're looking across the horizon, and it's like you're saying, we haven't done that great of a job in our communities of sort of getting ahead of this, which I wholly understand is really complex and complicated, and just is it's difficult to do. But so if we're not getting ahead of this, and we're not able to actually contend with it and deal with it with the current situation we have now, and then we have an evolving environment in Ukraine and a conflict where all these new tools and capabilities are being developed and tested, and then that comes back to our own communities. What are we if you're forecasting and you're reading your reading the tea leaves, so to speak, what are you seeing in the next few years that are sort of trends and indicators for us that we should be looking at or be concerned about?
My tea leaves are so optimistic, I know. um, yeah, so I would go back to what I'd said earlier about how people want to be on the offense. And I think that the next step is for emergency managers, for anybody involved in security, to study what has happened with the information warfare, with the battling of disinformation, with the hacking, including of critical infrastructure that has gone on in this conflict, and channel some of those ways into, finding out how people can be more involved in resilience and response. Because you had this entire, digital army, so to speak, of people who were ready to, jump into the war to, battle on behalf of Ukrainians in this information space. So how could that same sort of fervor and energy be channeled into, preparing a community for disaster, for being able to respond, once that disaster arrives, to being able to be a conduit and to help first responders and emergency planners and security officials, instead of jumping into the space in such a way that is going to disrupt operations. So this definitely has to be studied. There has to be some takeaways, and there has to be forming that into some sort of action in such a way that you tap into people's desire to get involved and be on the offensive and not just on the defensive.
I'm glad you said that, because that's where my mind was going as well. Is that if we know the avenues that people pursue to try and do something from their phone to try and help, or whatever the case is, if we can preempt that, if we can sort of hijack that and then use that for good, so if we had the capability as, community leaders or whatever the case is, and officials, to be able to have a platform for people to sort of plug into and to be able to harness that, as you're talking about, I think that could be tremendous in terms of getting people oriented in the right direction. But then the follow-on question, at least in my mind, comes to if we have the capability or even the manpower and resources to be able to have a platform like that. And if we could deploy something like that quickly, because then once you do, just the sheer quantity of people wanting to help from not just even your own community, but statewide or nationally or even globally, could be overwhelming. And so that's sort of a resource question, I think, as well, which would have to be considered. What are your thoughts on that?
You are definitely right. I mean, because my mind goes to the how an agency would feel that they need to have some people in there to manage the civilian component, whether it's a volunteer component, whether it's seen as sort of a reserves that comes up in a time of need. Departments that do have reserves in other capacities. There's supervision, there's training, there's equipping, there's all sorts of expenditures that go into being able to maintain readiness of such a force like that. And the theme with the Ukraine Digital Army is that there was basically no training other than here's how you log on to our website and be able to use this tool and have fun, go at it. If there was a similar operation in place that was managed by a government agency, the first question would be, would as many people be as excited about it, as they would be from, guys in Guy Fawkes masks, who are shady but good. And, also, would people in that space who are volunteering their time feel that they were hamstrung by rules, as to how much they could do, how, far they could go, what they were supposed to say, what they were supposed to do. Whereas in this Ukraine space, they've also had free reign in that aspect, to be able to engage with people on the Russian side, to be able to say, hey, I have time to sit down and do 100 text messages tonight. So I think the funding is a big problem, and bureaucracy would be another one. A lot of agencies would be really nervous to pull in a volunteer component without guardrails of some type, without some red tape. So that could end up frustrating the people who want to help.
So do you ever envision that crowdsourcing could be a capability?
I think that it could, but not tomorrow, because there are going to be so many takeaways that come from not just good operations like in Ukraine, but with operations for bad, like the extremist crowdsourcing, that could instruct how people are operating from their different motivations, how those motivations can be channeled into something that helps the populace, that helps responders when things go awry, and how basically a groundswell of support that you can't necessarily predict before an event happens can be used to the benefit when it does occur. So I think that there are a lot of questions that need to be worked through, but I think that with examples, and even some sociological study of how people are reacting in times of crisis and using these tools in times of crisis would have to inform how those transformations are used to the benefit of, say, emergency managers.
I definitely think there's a lot of lessons to be learned as the situation continues to evolve and change. And I think you're definitely right. I mean, I would like to see crowdsourcing become ultimately a capability, because even though it may be possibly resource intensive on the front side, it has the capability of expanding, organizational capability just
Right.
because the nature of it. And you get so many people to help you do things relatively with a low barrier to entry. But I really do take your point on, there's going to be a public trust issue, there's going to be a social acceptance issue, and there's going to be a bureaucratic issue behind getting that to happen, because people do feel, right, a sort of freedom or a sort of, appeal to being able to just jump on and send some messages to people and sort of, get involved in the conflict in that way. And I'm not sure that's easy to replicate in terms of if you have a government agency doing it, right? And so that's going to be difficult. But in terms of the future and sort of what it holds, I mean, we've seen this become, and I've talked to many other of my colleagues, and we've seen this become just sort of overwhelming in terms of the information space. And we've seen, for example, Ukrainian authorities basically say, don't share anything about troop movements or videos or TikToks or anything like that. And you've actually seen a large public support for that, to where people actually are sort of self-correcting and telling others not to share things because it gives away locations. And you've also seen just the explosion of OSINT capability, in the Twitter sphere and all that stuff like that. And so we've seen a lot of things come into a more of a verified space as well in terms of OSINT, but also the public reaction to sort of trying to contend with all this different types of information that are coming out, and sort of the government recognizing that there's so much going out there that they've got to also self-contain and self-correct a little bit as well. Is there an evolution to this, to a certain point, to where things become more restrictive because there's just so much information out there? And then how do you sort of, I guess, in your opinion, how do you sort of achieve a balance between, somebody's ability to have a TikTok video versus it giving away troop movements?
Those are very, very good points, because the person who is not trained in open source intelligence will often put out stuff without realizing that it's OSINT, without being cognizant of the fact that if you're there viewing it, then your foe is out there viewing it as well, and they're digesting it and using it as they will. I kind of wonder, since it would be very hard to put these capabilities back in the bottle, if there needs to be an expansion of OPSEC training, basically, operational security that doesn't just focus on people who are working in sensitive spheres, but acknowledging at this point that almost everybody's in a sensitive sphere by being out there and being able to photograph a troop movement that's happening down at the corner and not thinking much of it other than to say, I'm going to, put this up on TikTok because, it shows Russians coming down my street. So it's just expanding the amount of people that we would classify as dealing with sensitive information. So it would be interesting to see how an expansion of OPSEC education could take shape, basically, and how people might respond to that as well.
Some colleagues of mine, and we sort of joke a bit that like we're getting back to like the whole civil defense era, after like World War II or during World War II, and you're in terms of the bunkers, the importance of bunkers, like you're seeing in Ukraine, and shelters and things like that, and how that's sort of been incorporated in Finland has been extremely interesting in terms of how they've integrated that into the building codes for residential buildings and apartment buildings and stuff, but also in the context of OPSEC and the old posters that were out there of like loose lips sink ships, and this all kind of constant reminders and public awareness reminders about what you say and who you're talking to has an impact on the conflict. And so it's interesting that this is almost going back in that direction, I guess. Maybe interesting is not the best word, but it's unique.
And journalists often hear back from an agency saying, okay, can you please not run that? Can you please sit on that for a little bit because, it's good, but can potentially jeopardize lives. But that's not going to be directed towards, the ordinary person on Twitter who just sees some great information and, wants to put it out there, wants to get a lot of retweets and doesn't understand or comprehend how that information could be endangering, or doesn't trust the government if the government says putting out that information could be endangering, and instead they just want to operate from pure transparency.
Yeah, definitely. It's going to be interesting times, to say the least. Well, Bridget, thank you very much for sort of sharing your thoughts and having this conversation with me today. And if people wanted to be able to get in touch with you, where could they find you? What's the best place?
So I can be found on LinkedIn. I can be found on Twitter at Bridget CJ. And definitely people can visit Homeland Security Today to see our latest articles on there.
Okay, great. Absolutely. So if you're listening to the podcast, go ahead and head over to Homeland Security Today and check out the work from Bridget and her team over there as well. A lot of great information and good stuff going on over there. So Bridget, thank you so much. And thanks for being on the show.
Thanks for having me.
This podcast is brought to you in partnership between Capacity Building International and the International Emergency Management Society. You can join teams today at tiems.info. That's tiems.info. And also sign up for the International Emergency Management newsletter by CBI at capacitybuildingint.com. Is there a topic you would like to hear about? Or are you a functional expert and want to be featured on our show? If so, reach out to us at info@capacitybuildingint.com and let us know. Thanks again for listening, and see you next time.